Inspiration from devastation. That's true for many in the field of meteorology. Tornado outbreaks and powerful hurricanes, sparking an interest in the next generation of atmospheric aficionados. For my generation, there was simply nothing like Hurricane Katrina. And 20 years later, in many ways, that's still true. What began as a wave in the Caribbean on August 19, 2005, eventually organized and strengthened into a hurricane named Katrina. It crossed southern Florida with 90-mile-per-hour winds, dumping up to 16 inches of rainfall. From there, Katrina became a meteorological monster. After rapidly intensifying into a Category 5 in the Gulf, the storm packed 175-mile-per-hour sustained winds. It had a central pressure as low as 902 millibars, still one of the top 10 lowest pressures ever recorded in the Atlantic. As Katrina moved northward over the next 3 days, it weakened slightly down to a Category 3 before making landfall in southeast Louisiana on August 29, 2005. Southeast Louisiana and coastal Mississippi were hit hard with a whole host of hazards. Wind gusts up to 136 miles per hour in Poplarville, Mississippi, rainfall of nearly 15 inches in Louisiana, 59 tornadoes across 8 states, including one in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. But the biggest threat of all was storm surge. A 27.8-foot storm surge, almost the height of a 3-story building and the highest ever recorded in a landfalling U.S. tropical cyclone, was observed in Pass Christian, Mississippi. It was found to have penetrated 6 miles inland on land and 12 miles inland along rivers. The result? 90% of structures within half a mile of the coast near landfall were completely destroyed. New Orleans was hit exceptionally hard. As the storm hit, surge, flooding, and failing levees, which malfunctioned or simply weren't tall enough, left 80% of New Orleans flooded. Some parts of the city were 20 feet underwater. Over 33,000 rescues were performed by the U.S. Coast Guard. 3 million people were left without power. At one point, 90,000 square miles of the U.S. were under federal disaster declarations from Hurricane Katrina, about the size of the entirety of the United Kingdom. 1,392 lives were lost. It was the deadliest hurricane for the U.S. since 1929, until Hurricane Maria impacted Puerto Rico in 2017. Total damage estimates for Katrina stand at about $200 billion, adjusted for inflation, still the costliest storm in U.S. history. Incredible images of the aftermath made headlines around the world. But in the days and months that followed, it became impossible to overlook the ineptitude in the emergency management response.
Katrina is an example of how a disaster was made so much worse by poor decision-making on the part of humans. And it started right away because New Orleans was essentially in ruins. So many people were stranded, looking for help. And some of the leadership at the time, between FEMA and other parts of the government, they were going on TV and basically touting how good the response was. And you can't tout how good things are going when all the news coverage and everything is showing that it's going terribly. Not only did you have all of these people that needed help and weren't receiving it in a timely fashion, but then it was all made so much worse because it all turned into finger pointing and a blame game.
Adding to the list of atrocities was the revelation that this disaster was not unforeseen.
It's hard for me to talk about Hurricane Katrina without talking about the devastating storm that hit New Orleans a year earlier, named Hurricane Pam. Delivered 20 inches of rain, storm surge that topped the levees, damaged hundreds of thousands of structures, and killed thousands of people. Now you might be thinking, well, I've never heard of this Hurricane Pam, and that's because it wasn't real. It was a simulated disaster meant to expose the vulnerabilities of New Orleans and prepare that city for when the big one would come. And a year later, Pam became Katrina. That simulation became a real disaster, and no one was ready for it. And after Katrina actually happened, the emergency management field basically realized, we can't let this crisis go to waste. We need to learn from it, change how we do things.
Since the disaster, $15 billion were invested in an improved levee system around New Orleans, over 150 miles of levees. But it didn't happen overnight. It took over a decade. 110 of New Orleans' 126 public schools were severely damaged or destroyed by Katrina. It took nearly 18 years to rebuild them, and in many ways, the lasting impacts remain.
Now, more than 20 years after the storm, there are still parts of New Orleans where if you go and look closely, and in some places you might not even have to look that closely, it might be fairly obvious, you'll easily find instances where some families or some parts of a town never recovered. And that's the sad reality when it comes to these disasters. Sometimes the recovery's quick, sometimes it's very long, and sometimes it never happens at all.
20 years later, Hurricane Katrina won't be soon forgotten here in New Orleans. It forever changed the city and its people. And to remember those that were lost, memorials are placed around the city like this.
Some of the most devastating storms in terms of their impacts are also the ones that result in the most mesmerizing satellite images and radar loops, and the things that at the same time that they're creating so much damage and destruction also make people just go wow, in awe, and not always in a good way. But I suspect Katrina certainly was an event that inspired future pursuits of a meteorology degree. And so Katrina is actually the event that caused the emergency management field as we know it today to evolve into this cycle that includes not just responding to disasters, but preparing for them as well.
From motivating a generation of meteorologists to spotlighting the importance of emergency management when it comes to weather disasters, the legacy of Katrina lives on more than 2 decades after the storm. A lesson in the power of Mother Nature, the resiliency of people, and the importance of preparedness. For Weather World, I'm Rob Lydick.